He didn't raise his voice, he didn't resist, he didn't break any laws, and yet, within minutes, he was shoved face down onto the hood of a car, handcuffed, and logged into the system as a dangerous individual. The only reason? He was a black man who dared to ask, "What did I do wrong?" If it weren't for the dashcam that day, the truth might have been buried just like so many times before, but this time, he didn't stay silent. And with calm, intelligence, and unwavering resolve, he forced an entire system to confront its own shadow. This story didn't begin with anger. It began with a glance, and it ended with a truth that could no longer be denied. The midday sun blazed over Macon, Georgia, scorching the pavement and blurring the air with heat rising from the sidewalks. Malik Anderson turned onto Pine Street, a familiar road leading to his mother's home. On the passenger seat sat a small grocery bag containing a bottle of milk, a loaf of bread, and a box of lemon cookies, his mother's favorite. After nearly a year away due to work, he wanted this weekend to be quiet, ordinary. But that sense of normalcy lasted only until his rearview mirror reflected the image of a patrol car. It had been tailing him for 4 blocks. Malik slowed down, signaled carefully, and changed lanes. The police car didn't pass. Its lights began flashing. A short siren chirped, not loud, but sharp enough to make his heart skip. He sighed and reminded himself, "Stay calm, like always." He pulled over, turned off the engine, and kept both hands on the wheel. Even a small move could be misinterpreted, something he'd learned from far too many unwanted experiences. The patrol car door opened. Out stepped a white woman, blonde hair pulled back, sunglasses reflecting the sky. Officer Lauren Whitaker. Her walk was rigid, her gaze sharp, and one hand casually rested on her holstered gun. "License and registration," she said, her voice cold as wind through steel. "Yes," Malik replied softly. "I'm reaching into the glove compartment. My hand will move slowly." He deliberately announced each step not out of fear, but because he knew this was a chessboard, and every move could trigger a trap. Whitaker didn't nod or respond. She just stared. He handed her the documents, his movements slow, measured, and without excess. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" she asked, eyes still fixed on his face. "My mother lives 2 blocks away. I got back from Seattle yesterday," Malik answered, keeping his voice neutral. "This is a rental car." "Yes, I flew in and rented it at the airport." A long pause. Then she said, "Step out of the vehicle." Malik blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Out of the car," she repeated, her tone more forceful. He opened the door and stepped out slowly, hands still clearly visible. Whitaker began circling him like she was inspecting merchandise. "You match the description of a suspect from a robbery this morning." Malik turned to face her. "I was at my mother's house all morning. You can verify that." No response. Whitaker picked up her radio and called for backup. Malik shook his head slightly, holding his emotions in check. "Officer, I know my rights. I haven't done anything wrong, and I'd like to know why I'm being detained." "Put your hands on the hood," she barked. Before he could respond, she shoved his shoulder forcefully. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. Malik's face held only disappointment. In silence, he placed his palms on the searing metal, letting her conduct a rough search. "I'm a corporate consultant for Fortune 500 companies," he said quietly, turning his head. "I'm not carrying a weapon. I have no drugs. And nothing on me except exhaustion from going through this again." "Don't talk," she snapped. "You're making this worse." A second patrol car arrived. A younger officer stepped out, visibly hesitant. Whitaker whispered something into his ear. Though he looked uncertain, he didn't object. Malik was handcuffed. "On what charge?" he asked, still trying to remain composed. "Obstruction of justice." "Obstruction?" Malik echoed. "I asked one question. You didn't like the answer." Whitaker pressed her lips together and pushed him toward the car. Malik looked back at the street where he'd grown up, now nothing more than a wound carved into his dignity. The quiet weekend he had hoped for had ended before it could even begin. The holding cell was no bigger than an old storage room. Gray walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and a metal bench bolted to the wall still reeked of paint and rust. Malik Anderson sat with his back against the wall, eyes half closed. Outside, Macon was slipping into the late hours, but inside, time seemed stuck between a deep breath and a sigh that hadn't yet been released. No phone call, no lawyer, no explanation. Everything that followed the traffic stop felt chillingly familiar, even though Malik had never been arrested before. He had seen this play out too many times, men like him being pulled from their cars, searched, accused, all because they resembled someone. And then, The words would begin to kill them slowly, written in the ink of official paperwork. In the next room, Officer Lauren Whitaker was typing. She didn't appear tense. The words flowed like a script she knew by heart. Subject displayed defiant attitude when asked to exit the vehicle, failed to comply with verbal commands, made sudden movements toward the officer potential threat. It wasn't a report written to reflect the truth, it was written to protect herself. She wasn't documenting what happened, she was controlling how it would be perceived. And in her 12 years on the force, that tactic had worked more times than not. But Malik wasn't like the others. In the cell, he wasn't repeating why or what did I do wrong. He didn't shout, didn't pound the door, didn't scream for justice. He just sat there quiet, upright, with eyes that missed nothing. He thought of his mother. Not because he feared she'd worry, but because she once taught him how to keep his heart from being swept away by anger. He remembered the lunch she had prepared, the look in her eyes when she'd realize her son wouldn't be coming home as promised. He also thought of another officer, on another day, with another man. A man he once saw arrested on a Seattle sidewalk, still holding a grocery bag, unable to get out a single word. That man had been jailed for 48 hours without an apology. That memory didn't make Malik weaker, it made him sharper. To him, this wasn't a shock, it was data. And data could be analyzed, compared, and turned upside down when necessary. He began to piece things together. The commands, the tone, the way Whitaker's hand landed on her gun the moment she stepped out of her car. The phrasing of step out of the vehicle, the sudden shove, the handcuffs. Every detail, every step, he was laying them out like a counter-offensive plan, not with fists, but with the law. He wasn't a nameless man swept into the system. He was someone who had advised Fortune 500 companies on legal strategy. And this time, the goal wasn't to protect a contract, but to protect the truth. He didn't need anyone to be angry on his behalf. All he needed was a skilled attorney, a copy of the report, and if Fortune allowed, a dashcam video. When the first light filtered through the bars, Malik still hadn't taken his eyes off the wall ahead. That gaze held no rage, no panic, only one thing: clarity. He was ready. And this time, the one writing the story would be him. The call was made at 7:19 a.m. On the other end was a deep, steady voice, unmistakable. Jordan Miles speaking. Malik didn't need to explain in detail. One sentence was enough to pull them both back to a shared point more than 10 years ago beneath the law library dome. Sleepless nights poring over case law and countless debates about a justice system that had never truly been just to black men. I was arrested without cause. Whitaker, Macon. A pause, half a breath long, then Jordan replied, no further questions needed. Hold tight, I'm on my way. 2 hours later, under the cold lighting of the Macon Police Department hallway, Jordan's footsteps echoed with quiet precision. A navy suit, crisply tailored, a leather briefcase in hand, and an unflinching gaze. He brought with him the language of preparedness, steady, sharp, and never needing to raise his voice to command authority. The desk officer glanced at him, ready to request ID, but hesitated after reading the business card. Jordan Miles, J.D. Federal criminal attorney, accompanied by the seal of the Georgia State Bar Association. He didn't waste time asking for directions. He already knew the way. When the office door opened, Officer Lauren Whitaker looked up from her desk. Her eyes paused for a beat, not out of surprise, but because she recognized the kind of adversary she never wanted to face. A black man who knew this system inside and out and wasn't afraid of it. "What's this about?" she asked, trying to keep her tone even. "Jordan Miles," he introduced himself, voice calm but firm. "I represent Malik Anderson. I'm here to review the incident report, along with any related video footage." Whitaker folded her arms and leaned slightly back. "That's internal information. The court will receive it when the time comes." Jordan nodded, as if she had said exactly what he expected, but his gaze didn't shift, still locked onto her. "If you believe in the accuracy of your report," he said, "then allowing the defendant's attorney to review the dashcam footage shouldn't be a problem." The words weren't loud, but they landed in the room like a pebble tossed into a still pond. No accusations, no conclusions, just a request of foundation for a fair game. And that, more than anything, was what someone like Whitaker found most unsettling. She didn't respond right away, just pressed a fingertip against the desk, her eyes flicking away for half a second. 2 hours later, Malik was released on temporary bail, his shirt still creased from the long night. Jordan waited at the door, nodding slightly as Malik stepped out. "Hey man, Malik said, his voice low and composed. "Half a day late," Jordan replied, "but we've got all the time ahead of us." They left the station without a wasted word. Inside, Whitaker looked through the window and caught sight of Malik's upright frame, walking, not hurried, but with decisive purpose beside his attorney. She felt something she hadn't in years: unease. Malik had stepped onto a field she once controlled, but this time he didn't step in alone. And this time the ones setting the rules were on the other side. Jordan Miles's office was always tidy, but that day, one corner of his desk was buried under stacks of paperwork and folders faintly stamped with the Macon Police Department logo. He sat before the screen, eyes moving slowly across each line of text. An internal document, obtained through an old contact, had just arrived in his encrypted inbox. 2 complaints. One from 2019, filed by Henry Dobbins, a warehouse worker arrested after being accused of displaying aggressive behavior toward an officer. No witnesses. The case was closed after 3 weeks. One from 2021, Rodney Ellis, a high school teacher, was pulled over and searched while driving his daughter home from a bookstore. The police report stated, the driver exhibited suspicious behavior. Rodney withdrew his complaint after 3 months. Both cases shared one thing in common. Officer's name, Lauren Whitaker. Jordan tapped gently on the keyboard. The search bar appeared once again, this time with the phrase, "Complaints dismissed Whitaker." Nothing else came up, but Jordan didn't need more. 2 was enough to begin. "You sure about this?" Jordan asked. They were sitting in a temporary rental apartment. Malik nodded. His gaze held no hesitation. "She survives off the silence of others," he said. "People who believe that if they stay quiet, it'll all go away faster. But I wasn't born to be silent." Jordan looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we start here." He picked up his phone and opened the dashcam footage obtained through the internal request. The video hadn't been released, only viewable on his secured device. Jordan scrubbed through slowly, pausing on the frame where Whitaker approached the car, hand resting on her gun, voice issuing commands. There were no signs of resistance from Malik, no sudden movement, no yelling, just a black man trying not to be misunderstood. At the same time, across town, Officer Lauren Whitaker sat alone in her 3rd-floor apartment, the living room light still off. The sun had gone down, but the glow from her laptop screen lit up her face cold, but not unfeeling. She had just reopened the dashcam video. For the first time since the incident, she was watching it with her own eyes, not through a report, not through memories distorted by self-preservation. Malik stood there upright, composed, speaking each sentence clearly. No shouting, no stepping forward, no threat. And then, she saw herself hand pressing on his shoulder, shoving him toward the hood. That shove wasn't part of procedure. It came from somewhere else, somewhere she didn't want to name. Whitaker sat still. The wind slipped in through a barely open window. She didn't rewind. She didn't fast forward. She just closed the video. And for the first time in years, she wasn't sure she'd been right. On the other side of the city, Malik stood by a window, watching Macon's dim lights reflect off the glass. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to express outrage. He was simply preparing for the next step. Not for revenge, but to end a silence that had gone on far too long. Anger can burn, but resolve, when placed in the right hands, can move mountains. And tonight, the mountain had begun to tremble. The cafe sat on a quiet street corner in downtown Macon. Nothing stood out about it aside from the faded sign and the subtle aroma of espresso just strong enough to drown out the traffic noise. Jordan Miles arrived 10 minutes early and chose the table by the window. He ordered nothing but water. His eyes scanned the space, calm, never impatient. 5 minutes later, the door gave a soft rattle, and Alicia Monroe walked in. She dressed simply, a gray button-up shirt, dark trousers, and a canvas tote slung over one shoulder. At a glance, no one would guess this woman had quietly served the justice system for nearly 15 years. Jordan stood up gently, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming." Alicia sat down, placed her bag on the table, and pulled out a slim folder, carefully wrapped in a plastic cover. She didn't speak right away. She simply looked at him for a moment, then exhaled softly. "I used to think," she began, "that if I didn't make waves, I'd be left alone. That if I did my job, closed cases on time, didn't ask too many questions, things would be fine." Jordan didn't interrupt. He knew what was coming. "But every year, There'd be a case that kept me up at night. A complaint that was returned, a report that was edited, a statement reshaped by just a few words. And almost every time, she paused, voice slower now, it was a black person on the receiving end. She slid the folder toward him. "I kept these," she said. "Not many, but enough to start." Jordan opened it. Inside were copies of 3 previously dismissed case files: Henry Dobbins, Rodney Ellis, and a third name Malik had never heard before, a college student whose wrist was broken during an impromptu traffic stop. All 3 had one thing in common. The officer listed was Lauren Whitaker. "Why now?" Jordan asked, eyes still on her, not pressing. Alicia looked out the window. The late afternoon sun cast a soft golden glow on the wooden tabletop. She spoke as though she were talking to herself. "Because this time, I saw someone who didn't bow his head, who didn't withdraw, who didn't beg, and that made me feel ashamed. All these years, I enabled it by staying silent, and I'm tired of feeling complicit." Silence settled between them for a few seconds. Not awkward, but solemn, a moment shared by 2 people from 2 very different directions, realizing they now stood at the edge of what had been and what needed to change. Jordan gave a quiet nod. "We'll add your statement to the file, but you'll have to be willing to testify." "I'm ready," Alicia replied without hesitation. "I don't want to stay silent one more day." That evening, Malik sat quietly on the sofa, the folder resting on his lap. The names, the details, the events, they weren't new, but for the first time they had a witness. He flipped to the last page where Alicia had signed her name. Alicia Monroe, Senior Administrative Clerk, Bibb County Courthouse. Below the blue ink, a slanting line carried a silent vow. "I saw, and this time, I will tell." Malik closed the file, his eyes lifting to the ceiling. Some truths don't need to be shouted to reach justice. They only need one person brave enough to stand, one person willing to say what others tried to bury. And that night someone had spoken, not out of duty, but out of conscience. Not to be forgiven, but to become part of the change. News of Malik Anderson's case didn't explode like a storm, it spread like cracks on glass. Quietly, persistently, and unstoppable. The first post appeared on a local journalist's page, just a few lines. A black man arrested for resisting, even though dashcam footage shows he was merely asking a question. No sensationalism, no emotion, but enough to stir something that had long been simmering. Then everything began to unravel. A retired teacher named Marcus Ray came to Jordan's office carrying a copy of a report he had once tried to file in 2016. The officer who wrote it that day, Lauren Whitaker. Next came Troy Jenkins, a former warehouse worker. He recalled a night after a late shift, pulled from his car simply for forgetting to turn on his headlights in the parking lot. "She didn't ask, just gave orders. I followed every one. Still got searched. Still got fined." The following day, a woman named Denise, a former neighbor of Whitaker, brought in a handwritten statement, recounting how her son had once had his backpack searched right outside his school gate for no reason. "I thought it was best to stay quiet," she said. "Now I know silence helps no one." At the Macon Police Department, Lauren Whitaker began to feel the one thing her badge and uniform had always shielded her from: the look. Not from superiors, not from civilians, from fellow officers. Those who once shook her hand each morning now gave a brief nod, then turned away. A friend from the training academy didn't respond to her lunch invite. A former patrol partner avoided her gaze in the hallway. And worst of all was the silence, the kind that was thick, not accusatory, but far from forgiving. She quietly checked her phone, missed calls, messages from unfamiliar numbers. Some sent links to news articles. Some sent only 3 words: "I haven't forgotten." She went home earlier than usual. The apartment was always quiet, but today the silence felt different, as if the walls themselves were watching. In the dim living room, she reopened the report she had written about Malik. Read every line again. Failed to comply with commands. Threatening demeanor. Advanced toward the officer. None of it was a complete lie, but none of it was entirely true, and the truth when bent still carries the weight of a shove. Meanwhile, Malik's phone began ringing more frequently, not from the press, from real people, voices trembling, cautious, but sincere. "You're the first person I've seen who dared to stand up. Can I share my story, even if it happened 4 years ago? Do you believe we still have a chance?" Malik didn't have answers to all of them, but he knew. The fact that they were asking was already a sign. The truth was no longer hiding in kitchens, in back seats, or behind locked doors. It was rising not as a wave of rage, but as a quiet current carrying an entire community that had once been suffocated into silence. And this time, they were no longer alone. The courtroom of the Bibb County Courthouse wasn't large, but that morning every seat was filled. The air was thick with anticipation, a kind of silence not born of law, but of the moments just before a door bursts open. Wooden benches creaked as people shifted. Cameras were set up in the back. Reporters crowded the right-hand aisle. And in the front row, Malik Anderson sat upright, hands clasped, gaze unwavering. Jordan Miles stood beside him, his suit pressed to perfection, gripping a thick folder tightly. Across the room, Officer Lauren Whitaker sat in a crisply ironed uniform, shoulders tense, eyes struggling to remain composed. But from the way her fingers tapped lightly on her thigh, anyone could see she was counting every second. When Judge Sylvia Cartwright struck the gavel, no one needed to be told everyone rose. This was no longer a preliminary hearing. This was a summons issued by the truth. Permission to present dashcam footage from the patrol vehicle operated by Officer Whitaker, Jordan said, his voice clear, each syllable measured like it had been forged from steel. This is visual evidence of the full events of the morning of June 17th. The room dimmed slightly. The large screen at the front flickered to life. The video began unedited, unsped. Malik's car pulled to the side of the road. He lowered his window, voice calm. "I'll retrieve the documents from the glove compartment. My hand will move slowly." His face showed no sign of defiance. Then came Whitaker's voice, steady but taut as a drawn wire. "Step out of the vehicle." Malik complied. In that moment, the entire courtroom held its breath. Whitaker approached. There was no visible threat, no weapon, no erratic behavior. And then, she shoved Malik, turned him, pressed him against the hood, and signaled to cuff him. He didn't resist. Not a single harsh word. Only an expression disappointment so deep it required no narration. The clip ended. No one spoke for several seconds. Even the cameras seemed to pause. Jordan stepped forward. "Your Honor, what does this video reveal? Not just an unjust arrest, but a pattern, a repeated blueprint affecting multiple victims." He called the first witness, Marcus Ray, the retired teacher, then Troy Jenkins, the warehouse worker, and finally, Denise, the mother no one had ever bothered to listen to, until now. One by one, each testimony aligned uncannily, pulled over without clear cause, told they were threatening, searched, and released with vague charges. When it was his turn, Malik was invited to speak. He didn't make a long statement. He simply looked toward the judge and said, "I'm not here to win a lawsuit. I'm here so I don't become just one more person silenced and forgotten." Whitaker was the last to be called. When asked, "Do you believe the video accurately reflects the events?" she stayed silent for a few seconds. "Not entirely," she answered. "I felt threatened at the time." "Can you point to the moment in the footage down to the second where the subject showed threatening behavior?" Whitaker bowed her head. She had no answer. The hearing concluded with Judge Cartwright declaring, "There is sufficient basis to proceed with a full trial." A single gavel strike hit the wood, clean, heavy, not loud, but undeniable. In the courtroom, no one applauded, no one cheered. But the glances exchanged between Malik and the witnesses, between the community and those seated in the back, were enough to say it. Something had shifted. Not just the exposure of truth, but its recognition by law, for the first time in many years. 3 weeks after the hearing, the name Malik Anderson veers. Lauren Whitaker was officially entered into the criminal trial docket of the Bibb County Court. Media coverage was no longer sporadic. Headlines now appeared in state newspapers and gradually spread to regional news outlets. Some called it the Awakening Lawsuit, others labeled it a test of faith in law enforcement in Macon. As for Malik, he continued living in his temporary rental apartment, taking morning walks, reading every page of the documents Jordan handed him, and declining all interview requests. He told Jordan one simple sentence: "I'm not here to tell the story. I'm here to end it." On sentencing day, the sky was overcast. The courtroom wasn't as crowded as during the initial hearing, but those present were silent in a way that required no reminder. Lauren Whitaker sat alone, no longer in uniform. Instead, she wore a light-colored blazer, her hair neatly tied back. She carried no bag, no familiar gaze followed her. The seat beside her was empty. Her lawyer arrived late and remained silent throughout the session. Malik entered shortly after, quietly. No press surrounded him. He carried only a pen, a small notebook, and the demeanor the entire town had come to know, calm, composed, unshaken. Judge Sylvia Cartwright opened the session with a firm tone. After reviewing the video evidence, witness testimonies, and past complaint records, the court finds the defendant, Lauren Whitaker, guilty of misconduct in public office and knowingly falsifying information in a police report. A faint exhale was heard from the back, not of shock, but of relief. The defendant is hereby permanently barred from holding any position related to law enforcement, including but not limited to police, security oversight, and civilian investigative bodies. The court waives a custodial sentence due to the defendant's extended service history, but does not diminish the severity of the offense. Whitaker showed no reaction, no movement, no defense. But for the first time, her eyes were hollow. She was no longer the one controlling the narrative, no longer in a position to write reports in her favor. She left the courthouse in complete silence. No one called her name, no one waited on the steps, not a single nod of sympathy. Just a woman quietly walking out of a building she once believed would never turn against her. Malik remained still. He didn't bow his head, he didn't raise it high, he didn't shake hands, didn't make a statement. He simply watched Whitaker disappear around the street corner, then turned to Jordan. "She wasn't left behind," he said softly. "She stepped away from it all." Jordan nodded, saying nothing. That day, Macon didn't change overnight. Cars still ran, people still moved, the familiar cafe was still bustling. But somewhere in the rhythm of daily life, something had subtly shifted, like an old hinge finally oiled back into motion. Justice, for many in that room, had once been a distant concept, something found in books, in lectures, or in the mouths of the powerful. But now, it had stepped off the page and stood upright on 2 feet, on hard evidence, and on the dignity of a man who refused to bow. Every Tuesday evening at 6:30 p.m., the lights in the community room of the Southside Civic Center turned on earlier than any other building in the neighborhood. There were no flashy signs, no flyers handed out, but week by week, more people came. Plastic chairs were packed tightly together, some leaned against the walls, and occasionally, someone just sat on the floor. On the whiteboard at the front of the room, written in large marker strokes, "Know your rights." The man standing in front of the board was Malik Anderson, sleeves rolled up, voice steady and clear, holding a blue marker worn down at the tip. There was no podium, no microphone. Malik didn't need one. His power didn't lie in volume, but in the calm strength of someone who had walked through fire and returned with a map for those behind him. He didn't lecture like a lawyer. He told stories about basic rights during a police stop, how to remember details in an unreasonable search, how to respond while staying safe and dignified. "The first thing," he said, "is don't let them write your story for you. They have a report. You have memory. And if needed, you have the right to ask for a lawyer before saying a single word." An elderly woman in the front row nodded. A group of high school students scribbled notes furiously. And in the quiet back corner, a young plainclothes officer listened silently, never asked a question, but never missed a session. After class, people often lingered, not for questions, but for the need to feel connected, as if their shared presence in the same room was a quiet declaration. We are not alone. One evening, as Malik was cleaning the board, a boy around 17 approached. He didn't speak right away, just stood there for a few seconds before finally saying, in a soft but resolute voice, "We can't keep staying silent, can we?" Malik set the marker down, looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. Not the smile of someone who had won, but the smile of someone who understood. That question was the sign of a beginning. "No," he replied, "but I'm not special. I just didn't step back." The boy nodded, then returned to his group of friends. Malik watched him go, his gaze resting on those young heads, on eyes just beginning to question, and from there, to seek. Jordan Miles, now back in Augusta, still called every weekend. "How many came to class today?" he asked. 36, Malik answered. 4 of them had never spoken in front of a crowd before. Jordan chuckled softly. "You're training storytellers now." "No," Malik replied. "I'm just reminding them that their voices were always there. No one ever listened." Malik hadn't returned to Seattle. He didn't know when he would leave Macon. But he knew this. Some wounds can't just be bandaged and forgotten. They need time. They need renewal. and they need people brave enough to remind their communities, we deserve to be heard. At the end of that night's session, the 17-year-old boy came back and placed a handwritten note into Malik's palm. The words were slanted, youthful but filled with resolve. "I'll be the next one to speak, and this time, I won't be afraid." Malik folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. It wasn't a victory, it was a generation awakening. Karen Whitaker left town on a Monday morning without anyone noticing. No formal announcement, no farewell post. The third-floor apartment was returned, and the car that used to be parked outside the police department had vanished. A few neighbors saw a moving truck the afternoon before, but no one asked questions. Perhaps because they understood, or simply because there was nothing left to say. Her name gradually faded from the news. The once explosive hashtags began to sink beneath newer headlines. But in the town of Macon, Georgia, the memory of her didn't disappear. It merely went quiet like deep scratches on old wood, no longer visible but still there beneath the fingertips. Meanwhile, Malik Anderson continued holding his Tuesday night classes. But now, it wasn't just students and local residents. Some teachers began incorporating his sessions into their lesson plans. A nearby high school added readings about the incident to its civics curriculum. One teacher wrote on the blackboard, "Know your rights, then help others know theirs too." In the 8th week, Malik received a handwritten envelope. Inside was a short essay from a 10th grade student. "Uncle Malik isn't famous. He didn't get angry. But he did what everyone wishes someone would do. He didn't run. And because of that, I know I can stand still without fear." He read that line 3 times, then carefully filed it into a special section of his folder alongside other letters, printed messages, and notes of thanks from strangers. "I used to stay silent. Now I want to speak. Thank you for not backing down." On the other side of the story, Karen lived in a small town in the neighboring state. She applied for a job at a private security company but was turned down. "For internal reasons," the recruiter said. But she didn't need the explanation. She was used to it. One night she opened YouTube and stumbled across a clip from a community class. Malik stood in front of the whiteboard, his voice calm as always. The final sentence he spoke that day made her close the screen immediately. Not out of anger, but because it was undeniable. Truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs to be told. And for the first time, Karen didn't think about what she had lost. She thought about what never should have happened. If only she had paused, even once, to listen instead of impose. Fall arrived earlier than usual. Golden leaves covered the yard of the Southside Civic Center. One evening after class, Malik stood at the doorway, watching the chairs empty as people quietly headed home. The 17-year-old boy who once asked about silence now helped coordinate the sessions. An elderly woman brought homemade cookies each week. The young plainclothes officer still sat in the back, occasionally nodding during discussions of the Fourth Amendment. Malik never saw himself as a hero. He never wanted that. He was simply someone who refused to be miswritten in the story of his own life. And by standing still, speaking out, and not stepping back, he did what so many once believed was impossible. He made the truth impossible to ignore. No one should be forced into silence. No one should have to prove they deserve to be heard. And once the truth has been told, it stays not because someone allowed it, but because it reached the hearts of those who needed it most. Malik didn't need to be celebrated. He only needed one thing, that no one else would have to go through what he went through in silence and unseen. Because truth doesn't need permission to exist. It only needs to be told, to be heard, and to be believed. If you've ever been forced into silence, ever wondered whether you had the right to speak, then this story is for you. And if you believe that stories like this deserve to be told, to be shared, and to be remembered, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and follow this channel not just to hear another story, but so you don't miss the voices that are still waiting to be heard.